Boss mocks black mechanic's daughter until she solves the impossible engine. The garage smelled of oil and old metal, the kind of place where hands got dirty and reputations were built. Mia had grown up here, watching her father fix the unfixable. But she'd never been more nervous than the day the boss rolled in an engine he called impossible. His smirk said everything. He didn't believe she had the brains, the skill, or the grit to touch it. She wasn't just fighting rusted bolts. She was fighting years of stereotypes, whispered insults, and the unspoken belief that a black woman didn't belong in this world, and yet deep inside, she knew a secret no one else did. Mia's father, James Carter, had been the town's go-to mechanic for over 3 decades. Known for fixing tractors in the dead of winter and coaxing life out of engines other shops gave up on, he'd built a reputation rooted in skill, honesty, and humility. But times had changed. A sleek new auto center had opened on the other side of town, run by wealthy businessman Richard Holloway. His staff wore spotless uniforms, and his customers drank cappuccinos while their cars were serviced. Mia had recently finished her mechanical engineering degree, but returned home to help her father run the small, aging garage. Some customers were curious about the boss's daughter, but others, especially from Holloway's side of town, looked her up and down with thinly veiled doubt. One humid Thursday afternoon, Holloway himself arrived with a classic V8 engine strapped to a dolly. It was a legend in car circles, supposedly seized beyond repair, a relic from a racing team that had burned through parts and patience. Holloway, with a glint in his eye, called it a test. "Might be fun to see what you can do," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But I'm betting you can't even get the cover off without calling Daddy for help." The words stung, but Mia didn't flinch. She accepted the challenge, knowing this was more than just about fixing an engine. This was about proving who she was, not just to him, but to the whole town. The first hours were grueling. The bolts were fused with corrosion, the pistons stuck like they'd been welded in place. Every move Mia made seemed to echo in her mind alongside Holloway's smirk. She imagined the conversations happening behind closed doors. "She's just a girl. Black girls don't do this kind of work. She'll mess it up and her father will have to clean up the mess." Her father offered advice from the sidelines but never touched the tools. He knew she had to do this on her own. As she worked, Mia remembered the summers she'd spent in the garage as a teenager, hands blackened with grease while her friends were at the pool. She'd learned the art of listening, not just to people, but to machines. A misfire had a sound, a bad bearing had a rhythm. And this engine? It was speaking to her. Word spread quickly through town. By the second day, curious neighbors stopped by, leaning over the workbench to watch. Some offered encouragement. Others waited for the inevitable failure. Mia methodically cleaned each part, cataloging damage and noting small details others might miss. She used unconventional techniques, heating bolts with a torch to free them, soaking components in solutions she'd mixed herself. These were tricks she'd learned from her father and from late nights reading obscure engineering journals. By the 4th day, she uncovered the real issue, a hidden crack in the engine block that had been overlooked by every mechanic who'd tried before. Most would call it the end of the road. But Mia had been working on a method in secret, a hybrid repair using a combination of modern alloys and precision welding techniques she'd studied during her degree. It was a gamble. If it failed, she'd not only ruin the engine, but give Holloway all the ammunition he needed to humiliate her and her father. On the 5th morning, the garage was packed. Holloway stood in the back with folded arms, whispering to one of his employees. Mia ignored them and focused on her work. With steady hands, she applied her repair method, welding the crack and reinforcing it with the alloy insert she'd designed herself. The crowd was silent, watching each movement as if the outcome could change the air they breathed. After hours of careful assembly, the moment of truth arrived. The restored engine was mounted on a stand, hooked to the starter. Mia wiped. Her hands took a breath and turned the key. The first cough from the engine was ragged, the second was stronger. And then a deep, throaty roar filled the garage. The sound was pure, powerful, alive. The room erupted in cheers, except for Holloway, whose face had gone pale. Mia stepped back, letting the hum of the engine speak for her. She didn't need to gloat, didn't need to say a word. But her father couldn't resist. "Guess she didn't need to call Daddy after all," he said, his eyes locked on Holloway. The crowd laughed, and for the first time, Mia allowed herself a smile. The story traveled far beyond the town. Local newspapers ran headlines about the mechanic's daughter who fixed the impossible engine, and a regional car magazine called her work a masterclass in skill and perseverance. Holloway never apologized, but word around town was that he'd stopped making jokes about girls in garages. His shop lost a few loyal customers, and some found their way back to the Carter garage, not just for the repairs, but for the principle. For Mia, the victory was more personal. She'd proven to herself, and to everyone watching, that her worth wasn't defined by stereotypes, gender, or skin color. She knew there would be other challenges, other skeptics, but this moment had cemented her place in the community as more than the boss's daughter. One evening, long after the shop had closed, Mia stood in the garage, running her hands over the smooth metal of the restored engine. It wasn't just a machine anymore. It was a symbol, a reminder that sometimes the hardest things to fix aren't mechanical, but the beliefs people carry. And somewhere, she hoped, a young girl, maybe one who had been told she couldn't, would hear her story and realize she could.